Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moffman coming at you again with another APUSH video. We're continuing to take a look at topic 9.3, the end of the Cold War. And when we were last here, we were starting to kind of take a look at the different aspects that went into the biggest scandal of the Reagan administration. That's going to be the Iran-Contra affair. And, you know, remember what this plan basically was. It was basically selling weapons illegally to Iran in exchange for Iran getting American hostages in Lebanon released, and then taking those proceeds from that illegal weapons sale and then funneling it to the Contras in Nicaragua, an anti-communist group, to help them try to defeat communists in Nicaragua, which, per the Bolin Amendment, was completely illegal. Now, to give you a little bit perspective as to kind of what's going to be kind of motivating some of this, you got to understand that the United States is, at least as we go through the Reagan years, there's going to be more of a desire to kind of disconnect a little bit militarily with what's happening in the Middle East. And one of those reasons for that is going to be the explosion of an American Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon, which is going to kill over 300 American servicemen. And so there was a sense there that, hey, let the Middle East handle its own problems. Now, that's not to say we're going to abandon Israel as an ally or anything along those lines, but there was a sense that for Reagan, his commitment was stopping communism, not so much addressing political military issues in the Middle East. So the idea being is that if you're going to try to kind of backtrack militarily from what's going on in the Middle East, something like an Iran-Contra deal is going to seemingly be a better idea, at least for those advisors under Reagan, even though, once again, this is totally illegal. Now, eventually, this will get out in terms of what the Reagan administration was doing. And we will see this being the biggest scandal since Watergate. And as we saw, 15 years earlier, we started to see Congress begin to investigate and ask questions like, what did the president know and when did he know it? In other words, was this, arms for hostages deal, was this something that Reagan came up with and demanded, or was this something else? Well, from the investigations that were conducted, it appeared that Reagan, and this is kind of typical for Reagan. Reagan was not a details guy. Reagan was never accused of working too hard. He was certainly not accused of being a micromanager. Reagan was a big picture idea guy. And his big thing was, well, I want to get those hostages out of Lebanon and I want to stop communism. And so some of his subordinates, like those working at the national, or the CIA and the National Security Council and places like that, they're going to be taking those big picture ideas and concocting this kind of a scheme. So what happens is that there are some subordinates in the CIA and the NSC and some other agencies that are going to be criminally charged and found guilty for doing this whole thing. Reagan, though, is going to be cleared of any kind of actual criminal charges or anything like that. Basically, the thing with Reagan was that this was an example of Reagan being too hands-off in his leadership style, that if you're not, watching the storm more closely, this is the kind of stuff that can happen. But once again, it doesn't help to bring confidence to the White House, as we had seen with lies from the Vietnam War and lies from Watergate, and now there's a sense that maybe you couldn't trust the Reagan administration to do things legally. So that being said, Reagan will survive this scandal, and in fact, his greatest accomplishments will come after that, and that is going to be, in some respects, kind of taking a different tack than in his second term than what he had in the first term vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. Now, if you remember last time, in Reagan's first term, he's going to be, calling out the Soviets as the evil empire. He is going to be massively outspending or trying to outspend the Soviets in terms of weaponry, investing in new technology like SDI, and there was a real sense that there's this nuclear proliferation that's going on, and this is going to lead us right into nuclear war. So it was a real sense of anxiety that we hadn't seen in 20 years. But things are going to change, and part of why that's going to change is because of new leadership taking over the Soviet Union. we will see a number of old codgers that have been leading the Soviet Union die off pretty quickly. In fact, there were 3 Soviet leaders that died in 5 years. And the basic thought eventually was that, well, they need to, appoint a younger person that's not going to die on them. So they will choose a man in his 50s, this individual right here, Mikhail Gorbachev. Now, Gorbachev, is an avowed communist, no question about it. He believes in the theories of communism. He believes in, a command economy, but he does have some liberal ideas. I mean, he is liberal for a communist. And what I mean by liberal for a communist, I mean more moderate in terms of being closer to American values than what we had seen up to this point. And Gorbachev was a smart guy. Gorbachev was somebody that was able to take a look at the Soviet economy and realize that it was crumbling around them, that it had rotted out. And, if you do have a crumbled economy, then you're going to have a crumbling society. And so Gorbachev is going to take some bold steps to try to address these problems, to, in essence, try to save the Soviet Union. So he's not going to try to destroy communism, but to kind of modernize communism and liberalize communism in a way that will provide more opportunities for Soviet citizens. And it's going to come in 2 forms. One is going to be what we call glasnost. And glasnost is going to be describing what we call a new set of political openness. Up to this point, the Soviet Union was villainized for being a very dictatorial, autocratic society where there was no real opportunity to freely criticize the government. You would get sent to gulags and work camps and, during the days of Stalin, executed. And, so there was no opportunity to criticize the government. Now that's going to change with glasnost. What had been purely state-operated media and news now is going to allow for privately owned media, newspapers to come out that will allow the Soviet people to express their political beliefs. And going hand in hand with that is going to be another area of reform, which is going to be known as perestroika. And perestroika is going to be talking about this idea of economic openness. As we said, the Soviet economy was starting to crumble, and so the idea is let's take in some of these freer market values and bring it into a command communist system. So this isn't destroying communism, it isn't destroying socialism or anything like that. But for example, even though yes, the government will still own the oil, the oil wells, and will still own the train lines, and will own the car manufacturing and everything, all the major industries. If you want to open up a small little business, selling pierogies or something like that, then you can do that. If you want to have a small little business that's doing, lawn maintenance, you can do that. Or fixing shoes, repairing shoes, things like that. Small mom and pop businesses that would be allowed to open up. We're even going to be seeing a willingness for some American businesses to come and open up in the Soviet Union, like, for example, McDonald's, if you can believe that. So there's this sense that Gorbachev is bringing a sense of openness and liberalism to the Soviet Union in an attempt to save the Soviet Union. And this kind of eases the tensions with Reagan and the United States. There's a sense for Reagan that, hey, maybe there is a Soviet leader I can work with. And maybe, from a sense of strength that we now have, clearly there's a sense America is on top of this rivalry right now. With America in a position of strength and a seemingly open-minded Soviet leader, maybe there's some stuff that can get done. But still, though, even though Gorbachev is making some reforms, it's still not a Western-style government. It's still not total freedom. It's, there's still political enemies, and there's still, for example, jamming, attempts by the West to bring information into the East. There's still a ban on, American imported goods for the most part. So there's still a sense of a life of oppression behind the Iron Curtain. And this is going to be kind of the impetus for Reagan's visit to the Berlin Wall in the late 1980s, where at the Brandenburg Gate, Reagan is going to be famously calling out the Soviet Union, and by name calling out the Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And basically, Reagan is saying to Gorbachev, okay, if you're going to talk the talk about being a reformer and changing the Soviet Union and opening it up, let's get to brass tacks. If you mean this, tear down the actual physical representation of this repression. And that is literally the concrete and barbed wire structure known as the Berlin Wall. Allow for real freedom of movement in Eastern Europe. Do not force, countries in Eastern Europe like Poland and East Germany and whatever to be communist if they don't want to be. So he calls them out. And that is going to be pivotal. It's sending a message to Europe that America is there for them. In addition, we're going to be seeing Reagan and Gorbachev be willing to work out something that a few years earlier would have seemed impossible. Reagan, the man that seemed to be all about building up the military and more nukes and more threats of war potentially to the Soviet Union, will also be the same president that will sit down with Gorbachev and be able to successfully negotiate the first arms limitation deal in 15 years with the INF Treaty. And here's a picture from this treaty deal right here. And so there's a sense of, hey, maybe we can achieve goals of détente like arms reduction and a better working relation with the Soviet Union without détente. That we can actually, from a position of strength, be able to get that relationship that we want. And it's going to seem to be working with Reagan during the late 1980s. Now, note, as we kind of round out the Reagan years, we'll see one more example of the United States kind of, winning or taking the clear lead in the Cold War, when the Soviet Union, after 9 years, realizing that they're not going to be able to, defeat local Afghanis, sound familiar, will be pulling out. Many at the time will describe Afghanistan as, Russia's Vietnam, if you will. And so that's another sign of, hey, the Soviet Union is weakening its grip. It's weakening its ability to try to control its neighbors. So even though the Cold War is not officially won by the time Reagan leaves office in January of 1989, it's clearly moving in that direction. I think, you can kind of safely say that there's a sense that America is dominating the relationship with the Soviet Union. And if someone were to say, hey, are we going to actually win this thing? There was a sense of, yeah, I think we are going to win this thing. But what almost nobody could predict, though, was how fast or how soon that was going to happen. We are talking within a matter of 2 years after Reagan leaving, the entire communist system in Europe collapses. The Soviet Union will cease to exist. The Berlin Wall comes down. We see the end of communism and the dissolving of the Warsaw Pact in Eastern Europe. But Reagan won't be there for that. That will be his successor, George W. Bush. And it will then lead to the end of one era and the beginning of a new era in history. And we'll start to get into that next time. We'll see you later.